This conference will now be recorded.
So let's understand this firstly. What I had yesterday was something like this. I have a virtual machine 1, I have a virtual machine 2, and when I went ahead and created a load balancer, there are a couple of things that I have configured for the load balancer. The starting of very thing is that when I started to create a load balancer, it is first asked me for a front end IP configuration. It said, okay, fine, please give me a front end IP so that users can hit me and all that stuff. So we had a front end IP configurations. Secondly, we went ahead and configured the backend pool. So I'll say backend pool, and in the backend pool, I said that okay, fine. There are two virtual machines that I have within the same virtual network, and I attached these two virtual machines to the backend pool out here. So I said, okay, fine. I've attached these two virtual machines in the backend pool. Third thing is that I configured something known as a health probe. Now, what is a health probe here? What is its role, guys? Why do we need a health probe here? Anyone? Anyone here? So when you all created a load balancer, did you all configure a health probe yesterday? So what do you think is the role of a health probe now? Anyone? Okay, it will check regularly that whether the servers are healthy or not. Meaning it's going to basically go to the server and it will do something known as a ping test. Ping test. So what it does is that it just hits the URL of the server and it just understands whether the server is alive or not or healthy or not. And if it doesn't respond, if the server doesn't respond for let's say two consecutive times, then I am marking this server as unhealthy and I'm removing it from my pool. That's what the load balancer health probe is actually doing right now. And remember, both the virtual machines, VM1 and VM2, were attached to an availability set yesterday. So we said, okay, fine, what an availability set is. We spoke about an availability set and we spoke about two main concepts there. One being a fault domain, the other being an update domain. We said, okay, fine, an availability set basically brings you this particular concept here. And we said, okay, great. We can configure the virtual machines on an availability set and then load balance them out here. And we used a basic load balancer yesterday. And one thing what will happen is that as and when you attach a load balancer to the VM1 and VM2, the public IPs of both the machines will disappear. Like these both the machines will not have their own public IP. Rather, the public IP that is attached to the load balancer is going to be allocated to both machine 1 and machine 2. This is what it's going to happen. This is how this is how the load balancer will be able to identify that what are the machines that I'm managing. Rather, I would say the load balancer is now acting as a parent and it will basically identify the child resources in the backend depending upon the IP of it. So these both machines will inherit the IP from the load balancer, meaning whatever IP that you assign to the load balancer, both the machines will now start inheriting them. But this was a basic load balancer. Now, what exactly happens here is that a basic load balancer is not really recommended for production based workload. Meaning, if you're running your applications in production environment, the basic load balancer is not recommended. And one very important thing is that in order for you to attach a basic load balancer or in order to basically for you to let's say load balance the traffic on a virtual machines or on a set of virtual machines using a basic load balancer, all the virtual machines that you are trying to manage should be a part of the same availability set. If they are not a part of the same availability set, you will not be able to use a basic load balancing mechanism, or you will not be able to use a basic load balancing solution at all. That's the issue. Meaning, I yesterday said that this is how the availability set looks like. We have a fault domain, we have an update domain, and etc. And we said, okay, fine, we are going to configure the machines in such a way. Now, if I do this and use a basic load balancer, great, I'm able to manage my traffic and etc. But what if the entire data center goes down? What if the entire data center now is now where to go down right now? Now, this is an issue for me because there might be chances that the entire data center can also go down. That's where Microsoft recommends you to go for something known as availability zone. That's what we were speaking yesterday. Let's talk about availability zone for a second. It's AV zone, availability zone. Now, what happens exactly in an availability zone is something like this. So, let me come back to the creation of a virtual machine. And let me use, let's say I'm not creating one, but I'm just using, or I'm just using the existing resource group out here. And these are the availability options that are available right now. And one of the option is called an availability zone. Now we said what an availability set is, we understood about that. But in case if you want to make sure that you want to be protected from a disaster about from the entire data center, you will need to go for an availability zone option. You just need to select which zone that you want to kind of so it says, okay, fine, zone 1 and zone 3 are not supported. So the zone is not available, zone 3 are supported. Let's see. So right now, if I change the zone to 3, meaning it's telling there are 3 zones in the region. Please select one of the zone out here. So this is how I select. So secondly, what I do right now is that let us look at the documentation of this. So it says, okay, fine, availability zone is this, and let's look at the availability options and let's look at the documentation of this one. It says, okay, fine, availability zone is something like this. Let's scroll down. Let's see the availability zones, and it says to protect things out something like this way. It says there are 3 different zones, meaning 3 different data centers that are spread across the same geographic region, zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. And we recommend that when you're creating a virtual machine, let's say we're creating 3 virtual machines, place the first virtual machine in zone 1, VM1 in zone 1, VM2 in zone 2, VM3 in zone 3. Place 3 different virtual machines in 3 different zones so that even if one of the data center is not available, let's say this data center is not available, you can still have your virtual machine 2 and virtual machine 3 that are running from 2 different zones out there. This is the concept of availability zone as such, and Microsoft recommends doing this out. But now I have 3 different virtual machines sitting across 3 different zones out here, and now I need to place something known as a load balancing solution. I have 3 virtual machines running across 3 3 different zones. So let me put it diagrammatically in this way. So let's say this is a zone. So it's a zone 1, so meaning data center 1, and your first virtual machine is running from this particular data center. And the second basically you have a second zone, and you have a virtual machine 2 running from it, and there are 3 different zones which are connected to each other, and you have provided 3 different virtual machines running from 3 different zones within the same region. Now the question here is that, okay, fine, can I place a basic load balancer here and manage the traffic? So I want to place a basic load balancer and I want to manage the traffic that is going to, let's say, virtual machine 1, virtual machine 2, and virtual machine 3. Because I have three machines, I want to load balance them, and these three machines are sitting across three different zones out here. Now, the question for you all is that can I achieve this using a basic load balancer? Yes, no, maybe. Anyone, any guess?
Yes. Is this possible, sir?
Okay, it's possible. Anyone else?
It is not possible.
Okay, but I'm still asking that. Okay, fine, it's not recommended, but the thing is that is it possible? Now,
No, Kiran.
again, coming back to my statement, I said that if you want to manage machines using a basic load balancer, all those machines have to be a part of the same availability set. Now, in this case, are they a part of the same availability set? Yes, no, no. Because if they were a part of the same availability set, they would be sitting within the same data center. They will not be across the data centers this way. Now, they are not a part of the same availability set, but they're a part of the same availability zone. In this case, you cannot implement a basic load balancing mechanism. A basic load balancer cannot manage this out, for which you will need a standard load balancer. A standard load balancer service. This is what we are getting into today. Is that what a standard load balancing mechanism is and how do you manage a standard load balancer and everything. So let's do that. So I have two virtual machines, or rather I have like about four virtual machines. Let's see this. Let's say okay. So I have a couple of virtual machines right now, and I am looking at the virtual machines which are VM1 and VM2 that are sitting in a region called East US. So these are two virtual machines that I'm right now concerned about. And these two virtual machines, one of the virtual machine is sitting in something known as zone 1. The other virtual machine is sitting in something known as zone 2. I'll say okay, great. And these two virtual machines are running IIS. So if I, let's say, go into virtual machine 1, take the IP of this particular virtual machine, it is running an IIS server. And if I, let's say, do something like default.html, it will return something like this. This is VM1. And if I now take, let's say, the IP of virtual machine 2 and say default.html, it will return something like this is VM2. So I have, let's say, configured the IIS and I've added a file to it called default.html, and both the machines are responding right now. Now what I want right now is that I will go to, let's say, the Azure portal, and I will start creating a load balancing mechanism, a load balancing solution, which is a standard one. So I'll say, okay, fine, this is a standard load balancer so that I can attach both of the machines setting in two different zones. This setting in one zone, this setting in zone two. So let me also write that is zone one and this is zone two. So I have two machines that are sitting in two different zones out here, and I would like to manage the traffic, or I'd like to balance the traffic here. So I'll come here and I'll say, okay, fine, great. I say load balancers, and I'll start adding a load balancer. And one very important thing is that I need to add the load balancer in the same region as my machines are. If it's in East US, I can only add a load balancer in East US so that it can manage virtual machine 1 and virtual machine 2. That is the rule. So I'll say great. Coming to create load balancer, I'll just say it is the existing demo VM resource group. I'll say this is load balancer East US. So something like EU. And I'm saying, okay, fine, this is not Central US, this is East US out here. And yesterday I selected something known as basic here. And now I'm selecting something known as standard. So I'll say standard. Great. I'll come here and I'll say, okay, fine, this is a public load balancer and it's a regional load balancer. I'll say next. I'll add a front end IP configuration. So it's the same thing here that I'm doing. So I'll say this is IP EU East US. I'll say create new. And now I'll say this is IP EU LB load balancer. I'll say okay. I'll say add. So I'm just adding the IP address, or I'm just adding the IP configuration for the load balancer. And I'm saying next. And I'm saying, okay, fine, I need to add the backend pool. I'll say add. And I'll say this is pool A. And I'll say, okay, fine, this is load balancing VNet. This is the only virtual network that I have in, let's say, East US. So let me go to the virtual networks. And let's say virtual network. And I have just one particular one particular virtual network in this particular region, which is called load balancer demo VNet, and which is sitting in East US. So that's the reason my load balancer service right now is only able to show that particular VNet because it's in the same region. So I'll select okay, fine, great. And as and when I did this, it's now telling me that, you know what, no virtual machine was found in East US with this particular criteria and all that stuff. But I have virtual machines. I have, let's say, two different virtual machines in East US within setting in the same virtual network. But it's now giving me this particular error message or this particular warning telling that, you know what, I am not able to see your virtual machines, or I'm not able to understand what you want me to add here. The reason being, now these both virtual machines have something known as public IP already. Virtual machine 1 has a public IP, virtual machine 2 also has a public IP. Now the rule here is that if these virtual machines have a public IP, they should be of a type called standard. It should be a standard public IP that you need to add here, which I haven't. Also, both of the virtual machines will have a private IP address also. So virtual machines, since it's virtual machine, you will definitely have a public and also a private IP. The private IP of both the virtual machines should be static and not dynamic. You cannot add the virtual machines to the load balancer until these conditions are met. So if you have an IP, great. It should be of a type called standard. If you don't have an IP, not a problem. If you have, or if you'll definitely have a private IP. When you have a private IP, it should be static and it shouldn't be dynamic. Until that point, this particular load balancing service cannot basically take those machines. So what I'll do, I'll go into my virtual machine using this particular condition. I'm going to the virtual machine 1 and I see there is a public IP added to it, and this public IP is of a basic type. So if I go into the overview, it's a basic public IP. When I was creating the service, I should have created a standard, but I haven't. So what I'll do right now is that I cannot change this public IP to standard. I cannot change the SKU to standard. So I'll go back into my virtual machine service, go into the networking of the virtual machine service, and I'll just say go into the NIC card of the service, or go into the NIC card of this particular virtual machine, because NIC card is the resource which will have both the public and the private IP associated. That's what we understood, right? That's what we said. Because here, if you look at the virtual machine architecture, NIC card will be associated with the public IP. It will also be associated with the private IP that is coming from the subnet. So both of the assignments are on the NIC card level. So that's the reason I'm going into the networking and I'm hitting the NIC card of the virtual machine one. And as and when I see the NIC card, it has the public IP, it has the private IP, both assigned to this particular NIC card. And this particular NIC card is attached to VM1. This is how we are able to communicate with VM1. So what I'll do using this logic, I'll go into the IP configurations and I'm inside the NIC card right now. And I'll say this is the IP configuration value that is assigned. I'll say, okay, fine, this is the IP configuration value. And firstly, I'll say, please disassociate the public IP address here. I don't need a public IP address for my NIC card. I'm in which ways putting a load balancer in front of it. So I don't need a public IP address. And I'll say the assignment is static. The private IP assignment is static. These are the two conditions that I need to fulfill. And I'll say save. So two things that I'm doing. One, I'm removing the public IP address from the virtual machine. Two is I'm making the private IP of the virtual machine as a static and not a dynamic. So that this can be now, or the load balancer now can understand what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and all that stuff. So let's wait for a second, and in the same time I will also go to my VM2 and do the same thing. I'll go into the NIC card of the VM2, disassociate the public IP, and then basically I will change the private IP to a dynamic. So I'll say VM2, and I'll also go into, let's say, the networking of the VM2, go into the network card of the VM2, and then make sure that the public IP is disassociated. So I'll say public IP, basically I don't need a public IP, so I'm going inside this one. I'm saying disassociate and make this as a static assignment. Now this will take some time in order to make sure it is saved and etc. Let's give it a minute and come back and see how it works. And this is now also disassociating the public IP, or this is also disassociating the public IP from VM2, and also making sure that the private IP is a static assignment. Now this will take somewhere around 2 to 3 minutes in order to happen, in order to update and etc. Now let me do one thing while this is getting created. Let me wait for a second. So any questions until this point, guys, on what we are doing, why we are doing, etc. Anyone, any questions till now? At this point, my virtual machines should not be having, let's say, the public IP. So if you see here, both the public IPs are gone. They are not there for VM1 and VM2. And even if I go into VM1 right now, it says now I saved the network interface card. I'll go back and I'll say save this out, and I'll do the same thing for this once this is done. So it will take somewhere around 2 minutes in order for this to happen. And once this is done, let me go ahead and let me recreate my load balancer again. So now I'll say add the backend pools. I'll say this is pool A. I'll say virtual network. And now it says, okay, fine, you know what? I now see two virtual machines that are running in the backend. And I'm only able to see this because I have taken out the public IP, and I am now basically, I have converted the private IP into a static assignment rather than a dynamic assignment. I'll say, okay, fine, add both these virtual machines into the backend pool. I'll say add. Now I'll also need to configure something known as inbound rules, wherein I will say the rule name is rule east US. Front-end IP configuration is the IP configuration of the load balancer. So whenever someone comes to this particular IP, please divert them to the pool A, and please divert them only when they come to a front-end port called 80, meaning over the internet. Please divert them to a backend pool called 80. And finally, I configure the health probe. And I'll say this is HP EU ECUS. Say this is a TCP protocol. Please check a port called 80. For an interval of every 5 seconds, please go ahead and look at this. And if let's say there are 2 consecutive failures, I can change this value to let's say 3 or 4, whatever I can define here. There are 3 consecutive failures. Please go ahead and mark that particular virtual machine as unhealthy. And I'll say add. Finally, I'll say review and create. So I'm adding the virtual machines and I'm reviewing and creating this out. So once the load balancer, and now once the validation is passed, I can just go ahead and hit the create button out here. So this is what I am doing right now. So once this is created, let's go ahead and see what is happening to my virtual machines. Let's see how the virtual machines are behaving, and let's see if the load balancer is working or not. Now, one question that I want you to think is that yes, we are doing this, and this is zone 1 and zone 2, which are in the same region known as East US. Now, you said that initially I said that availability set is great, but if the entire data center were to go down, then no matter how many machines you have and no matter what combination of availability set you have, none of your machine will be available because the entire data center is down. So we said, okay, fine, we'll go in and we'll go and create something known as availability zone so that we can spread our applications across 3 different zones out here and then have them managed with a standard load balancing solution. But what if the entire East US is down? What if all the zones in the East US are down? Could it be possible? Very, very unlikely, but we still have to consider that scenario. What if the entire East US is down? If the entire East US is down, firstly, your load balancer will not work because your load balancer is in a location called East US. The load balancer will not work. There is no point in me talking about the VM1 and VM2 at all. The load balancer itself is not working. Now, I come up with an idea that, okay, fine, you know what? I want to achieve something like a cross regional load balancing, meaning I have East US here, great, but let me go ahead and also create 2 different virtual machines that are running from a region called West US. Same application, everything is the same. So it's West US right now. And I want to make sure to attach these machines to this particular load balancer so that this load balancer can manage these machines as well. So that just in case East US is down, West US can come up. Is this possible? Yes, no, maybe. Anyone, any thoughts here?
Yes.
Is this possible to achieve?
Sir,
Same
one
region,
load
yes, exactly.
balancer.
Mhm.
Sir, for one load balancer, we could arrange, you can assign for more than one zones or more than one regions. That could be possible.
No, it is not possible. That's what I was coming to. That's what I'm coming to. Is that if you want to manage the traffic using the load balancer is a regional device in nature. You cannot have load balancer sitting in East US and
Yes,
your
yes.
virtual machine sitting in West US. You cannot do that. For which I need to create another load balancer place it somewhere here, and I need to create this load balancer in West US. And I then need to do the same thing what I did till now. I'll need to attach both of these machines to the load balancing solution that is sitting in West US out here. But how will I basically manage these two load balancers? We'll come to that. But let's do one thing. Firstly, this load balancer is created. So our first load balancer is ready. So let's see if the load balancer is working or not. So the first load balancer is ready. So let me go into the first load balancer. And let me say front-end IP configuration. I'll take the public IP of this load balancer right now. And one thing that I want you all to observe is this. So this is the public IP of the load balancer. Let me now basically go back to my virtual machine service. Do you see VM1 and VM2 both have the same IPs? And this is the IP of the load balancer 23.101.133.102, meaning whenever you attach a load balancer to a virtual machine, the load balancer goes to the NIC card of the virtual machine and gives it the IP of what it has. Whatever IP that is assigned to the load balancer is given to the virtual machines. That is how the load balancer is able to do a traffic management. So now I'll say, okay, fine, great. I'll say this is default.html and it says this is VM1. Let me take the same IP, go into an incognito window. Still saying VM1 because it's cached a lot of things in my end. So let me go ahead, stop one of the virtual machines. Say stop. And while this is getting stopped, let me go and refresh my page. It's saying service unavailable. Now it says VM2. So it might take somewhere around 2 to 3 seconds for the load balancer to identify whether your machines are up and running, and then it'll actually divert your traffic to that. So it's now able to manage these traffic. Now the same thing I want to achieve with these two virtual machines, which is VM3 and VM4, which are sitting in a location called West US. So I'll do the same thing out here for these things, and let me start this out again. Start this machine, and let me now open up this particular machine called VM3. And what I'll do right now is that go into the networking again. Since I need to disassociate the public IP, so I'll just go into the networking. I'll say network interface. I'll say IP configurations. I'll say disassociate and make the static save. Same thing I'll do for VM4 as well. So VM3 and VM4 are two different virtual machines that are running in different region known as West US. Now I'll go here. Go into the IP configuration of this particular virtual machine. I'll say create, disassociate this one, make the static, save this out. So doing the same thing what I've done. Now again I'll go into the virtual machine, sorry, into the load balancing service. I'll create another load balancer. And this time around I'll say, okay, fine, it's the same resource group, not a problem. So it's a load balancing demo. I'll say this is load balancer West US. So I'll say WU West US. The region is West US. And I'll say this is public, this is regional, same thing. And I'll say next. Again, adding a front end IP configuration to my load balancer as well. I'll say load balancer IP West US. IP West US. Add. I'll say next backend pools, and I'll say add a backend pool. and now I'll be selecting the virtual network that is running in West US. This is the West US load. This is the West US virtual network because I only have one. It's showing me one. I'll say go ahead, add these two virtual machines, 3 and 4, into this, and I'll say add. I'll say add this out. Inbound rules again, same thing. I'll say this is rule West US. Front end IP of the load balancer. Select pool A, TCP, and I'll say this is port 80 in the front end. Go and hit backend port 80. Health probe, and I'll say okay, fine. Go ahead and configure the health probe, and I'll say HP West US. Protocol is TCP. One healthy thresholds is good enough. I'll say add. Finally, I'll say review and create. So now what I'm doing is according to my architecture, I am saying this is configured, this is working. This is great. But now let me go ahead and also configure a load balancer in WestUS so that I can attach both the virtual machines out here. So firstly, I went ahead and disassociated the public IPs, then made sure that these virtual machines are, let's say, having a static IP assignment for the private IP. And then I'm attaching this particular load balancer right now. So let me go ahead and hit the create button right now. So let's give it a minute or two. And our primary load balancer is actually working fine. This is good enough. It's saying VM1 and VM2. It's alternatively giving the request to VM1, VM2 based upon whichever server is healthy. So let's give it a second and let's look at this particular load balancer right now. And let's start working with this. So this will take like a minute or two. So guys, any questions till now, guys? Anyone, anything? Is it okay? Is it confusing on what we are doing, why we are doing this out? Anyone? Anything till here?
Kiran, I have a doubt, Kiran.
Yeah.
Like, what will be the maximum number of VMs can we attach to a load
Uh,
balancer?
there is no maximum number. Like how much ever number that your subscription allows you to create, you can create so many and attach it to the load balancer, provided the virtual machines and the load balancer are running in the same region.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Kiran.
Okay, your question was how do you create a standard load balancer, standard public IP? So, so public IP is actually another resource. So if I hit public IPs, you have a public IP address. You can say create a public IP address. This is where you can select the SKU, standard, basic, whatever it is. So let's wait for this load balancing service to create, and it said it's created the service. So let me go into the front end IP configuration. Take the front end IP. Say this is default.html. This is VM3. Since it's saying VM3, I'll now go to the VM3. I'll stop it to see whether it's working for VM4 because it should, get me VM4 as well. So I'll say okay, fine, VM3. So let's go ahead and stop this out. Let's give it a second and then try this out. You also try it in an incognito window. This site cannot be reached. Let me go ahead and try it in an incognito window right now. And it should throw the same error message. Can anyone let me know why I'm getting this error message out here? Anyone, anything? Meaning in this available pool, in the West US virtual machine pool, only VM3 is responding. VM4 is not responding. So how do we troubleshoot this out? But by this error message, can anyone tell me why I might get this even if I do it in an incognito? I still am getting the same error message. Can anyone tell me why or what could be? Let's say if you're getting the error message while you're working tomorrow, how do you troubleshoot it? What do you look at? Anyone, anything, any clue out here or any guesses? There is no right or wrong answer. It's
Is
just the
there an
approach basis. Mhm.
is there an IA configuration done?
Okay, IIS configuration is okay, great. Also, one thing that I'll be looking at is that if I get something error message like this, I'll first look at the networking policies of the virtual machine to see whether the port 80 is allowed or not.
What is allowed, not allowed?
Not allowed, right? Exactly. So first I'll do that. Port 80 is allowed. HTTP is allowed on the virtual machine, meaning it should respond. But if this is also it's allowed and it's not responding, that means the IIS is not configured on it. Is that was the right answer? I haven't configured the IIS. So if I haven't configured the IIS, how do I configure it right now? Anyone? How should you configure the IIS? Can anyone help me with that?
Log into RDP.
Okay, you need to do an RDP.
Server,
Sir, but there is
server
no
manager.
API.
I'm sorry.
You have to do an RDP, but there is no public IP address for this.
There is no public IP address at all. Meaning, what I did is that I disassociated the virtual machine with the public IP. I said, okay, fine, deny the public IP address. And this is the public IP address of a load balancer. This is not a public IP address of the virtual machine. So if I take this public IP address, and if I say MSTSC, go to a let's say RDP service and try to do an RDP inside it, it'll kind of do the circle and throw an error telling that what, I cannot do an RDP because this is not a public IP of the load balancer. This is a public IP of this is a public IP of not the virtual machine. This is the public IP of the load balancer, and this will throw an error. Meaning I don't have a public IP right now. I don't have any means to do RDP right now. Now, how do I make sure to install IIS? Because I need that service to be running. There is now something known as run command, using which I can run a PowerShell script on top of the virtual machine without having to log into it. I don't have to do an RDP right now. I don't even need the RDP port to be open. I don't even need the, let's say, the public IP for this virtual machine. And I will share a script with you all. So the script looks something like this. It's a 3-liner script, which will basically install IIS on top of your virtual machine. So let me open this out. Not run in PowerShell. I'll say edit. It's a 3-liner script which says imports import module server manager, install Windows feature, the name of the feature is web server, include management tools, and then it's adding something known as default.html, and it's adding a content inside it. Just take the script out, go into the run command, paste it here, and I'll say run. That's it. It'll take like about a minute or two to run the script out, and it will install the IIS service on the virtual machine. Now you can do, or you can install the IIS without having to do an RDP inside the machine. This comes into picture when you have, let's say, somewhere around 10 or 20 virtual machines that you need to install IIS on. You don't need to actually do an RDP into each and every machine, install IIS and do all that manual procedure. You can have a script in place that will take care of it. Okay, this is the use case scenario of it, and that's the deliberate reason that I did not install IIS on this machine. And I'll do one thing, I'll also share this script with you all. So I'm just sharing in the chat. So if anyone can take this and put it in the WhatsApp group, it'll be a great help. Okay, please take the script out, place it in the WhatsApp group so that everyone in the offline class can also use this out. Now you cannot run this script on your machine. It will throw an error because your machine is not a server. It's normally a Windows machine that you have, so it's not a server. And once you have it, this load balancing mechanism should work. It should be able to show you that okay, fine. Like it will take like about 4 or 5 minutes for that script to run and install this out. Until this point, you'll get the error. Once you have done that, your virtual machine 4 will also start responding back. Now, finally, now I have this configured, great. But if this virtual machine or if this load balancing service were to go down, meaning if the East US region were to go down, I need to configure or I need to make sure that the traffic is automatically diverted to the West US region. But these two are two different virtual machines. I mean, these two are two different load balancing services. Then how do I do this? This is where I introduce another service called a global load balancer, which I will be covering on Monday on what global load balancers are. But I want you all to read it. Just type in global load balancer Azure. Just do it in Google. And this is the first thing that you'll get. It's called cross region load balancing mechanism. And it gives you a good amount of documentation. Please read this out and let me know what can be done here. And the other question that I want you all to look at is that I now want to do an RDP. Now it says okay, fine, it is true, it is installed. So now if you kind of take the IP, so this is the IP of the load balancer, and say default.html. So why 3 is coming up. Let's take 4. Okay, 4 is also responding right now. So a couple of questions that I want you all to ponder on is that firstly, what is a cross-regional load balancer? How can you add this and manage all the virtual machines in the backend? That's the first question. Second thing is that now I have attached a load balancer, great, it's working. But as an administrator of my organization, I want to do an RDP. I want to do an RDP inside the virtual machine too. But the issue is that the virtual machine doesn't have a public IP. So how can I end up doing an RDP right now? So these are the questions that I want I want you to look at. That how can you do an RDP with a load balancer IP? Or can you do an RDP with a load balancer IP? Secondly, how can you use the service known as a global load balancer? How can you use this and what can you do? This is the documentation that I want you all to read. And we'll start the Monday session by asking questions about this. So please do read this out and we can start the session that way. Any questions for today, guys?
Kiran, I have a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just now for running IIS, like for installing IIS in the VM, we have run the
Hmm.
script, right?
Right,
In that, we are setting the path inet pub followed by www root followed by
right,
default.html. Like
right,
if we consider in production, we'll be having lots and lots of files.
right,
So for now we have only default.html. We are
right.
setting the content and we are throwing into the
Yes,
VM4. But
yes,
in real scenario production, will be having some HTML files, CSS files,
right,
JS files, and many more files.
right.
So in that case, how it deal, like how that script will deal.
So the script will be big enough to go ahead and let's say add files and etc. And in that case, you will not be using something known as a run command out here because run command is for basic operations. This is for basic
Okay.
operations. In that case, you'll be using something known as a custom script extension using which you can install a complete PowerShell script on a virtual machine. So this is called as an extension and I go into the extension, I say add here and I'll say custom script extension using which I can run a PowerShell script out here. So I'll show that also. I'll show how's that particular demo. So a couple of things on Monday that I need to demo out. So I'll show that on Monday if this is okay for you.
Is okay.
Okay. So
Thank you.
this is a demo that I'll do on Monday, but please give it a reading. Give this cross load balancing a read, and let me know if you have any questions with this. We'll discuss about this. Okay. Any other questions, guys? Okay, if there are no further questions, we're good to close. And have a great weekend, guys. We'll meet on Monday. Thank you.